There is a specific kind of film that doesn't just capture a moment in time. It becomes the moment. Fast Times at Ridgemont High arrived in the summer of 1982 with a script by Cameron Crowe, who had spent a year undercover in a real San Diego high school, and what came out the other side was something closer to a confession than a movie. Funny, frank, and quietly devastating in ways that teen comedies simply were not supposed to be. It left behind a cast whose real lives turned out to be just as surprising as anything that happened inside those Ridgemont hallways. Here is where they are now. There for the entire shoot, Sean Penn refused to answer to his own name. His dressing room door read Jeff Spicoli, and anyone who called out for Sean simply got no response. He was 21 and already operating at a level of commitment that made everyone around him both uncomfortable and riveted. Spicoli, ordering pizza delivered to Mr. Hand's classroom because it's our time, became one of cinema's defining comic creations, but Penn played him with something real underneath, a refusal to be diminished that went far beyond the joke. The friction with Mr. Hand was not manufactured. Penn deliberately needled Ray Walston off camera, calling him Hand, between takes to keep genuine irritation alive. Director Amy Heckerling later confirmed the van hotboxing scene used actual marijuana. Penn also destroyed the film's yellow Camaro himself. No stunt driver. 2 Oscar wins followed, for Mystic River and Milk. So did a 33-day jail sentence for assaulting a photographer, a secret interview with fugitive drug lord El Chapo that triggered a federal investigation, and years of humanitarian work in disaster zones. He is 65 and arrived at the 2026 Golden Globes with Moldovan actress Valeria Nikov, still carrying the same charge he had at 21. The person responsible for Fast Time's most replicated image had a very different story waiting on the other side of that red bikini. Ask anyone who saw Fast Times at Ridgemont High in a cinema in 1982 what they remember most clearly, and the answer is almost always the pool. Phoebe Cates, stepping out of the water as Linda Barrett in a red bikini while moving in stereo, drifted across the soundtrack, was 18 years old and terrified the neighbors on the surrounding hills were watching through binoculars. She described the scene not as sexual but as a joke, delivered entirely at Brad Hamilton's expense. Linda was the sophisticated friend dispensing advice that sounded wise and frequently wasn't, and Cates played her with a dry precision that tends to get overlooked because of the bikini. She had come to acting from modeling, which she openly loathed, and had done solely for the money. After Gremlins and Drop Dead Fred, she stood at the threshold of genuine stardom and chose, in 1994, to walk away completely. She had married actor Kevin Kline in 1989, and her children needed her present. She opened a luxury boutique, Blue Tree, on Madison Avenue in 2005, and can often be found working the floor herself, entirely unconcerned with mythology. The store remains thriving in June 2026, and she and Kline have been married 37 years. The man on the other side of that bathroom door had a rather more complicated relationship with what the film made of him. The arc of Brad Hamilton is the funniest slow-motion collapse in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and Judge Reinhold, who was 24 when he played him, nearly quit the production over one scene. He begins the film as the senior with everything and ends it in a convenience store wearing a pirate hat. The bathroom fantasy sequence was something he described afterward as the bravest thing I've ever done. In one improvised take, he introduced a prop so inappropriate the entire crew broke down, though it never reached the final cut. Beverly Hills Cop turned him into a genuine star, and the Santa Claus franchise kept him visible for 2 decades. On a recurring role on Seinfeld as the close talker gave him a whole new generation of fans. He has spoken openly years when studio politics buried him, and typecast him as the flustered straight man. A 2016 arrest at Dallas Love Field after a confrontation with TSA agents briefly made headlines, though charges were dismissed. He lives in Little Rock with wife Amy Miller and their daughter Haley. At 69, finding the distance from Hollywood suits him well. Beverly Hills Cop. Axel F. became Netflix's biggest summer title of 2024. The football star, who delivered the film's most purely physical performance, had a very different journey waiting ahead of him. The moment that defines Charles Jefferson in Fast Times has almost no dialogue. Spicoli convinces him that rival players wrecked his car before the big game. And Forrest Whitaker delivers the build-up, the stillness before the explosion, entirely through his body. He was 20, had arrived in Hollywood on an opera scholarship, studying classical voice at USC rather than performance. For Jefferson, he had to rapidly rebuild weight loss for another project, eating continuously to look like a convincing linebacker. Amy Heckerling recognized his presence immediately. After his audition, she spotted him skipping across the Universal lot in pure joy and loved it enough to write it into the film. The career that followed resists easy summary. The Last King of Scotland won him the Academy Award for Best Actor in 2006. Black Panther, Rogue One, UNESCO Special Envoy for Peace, a black belt in Kenpo Karate. He was married to Keisha Nash for 25 years, divorced in 2021, and she passed away in 2023. 4 children. A grief the press has largely left alone. He received the Lifetime Achievement Award at the 2026 Joy Awards in Riyadh, an honor that did not feel too large for the man receiving it. Another cast member, who barely registered on screen that summer, had an even more convoluted road to recognition. He appears in Fast Times at Ridgemont High for perhaps 30 seconds, says almost nothing, and is listed in the credits as Nicholas Coppola. He was 17, the nephew of Francis Ford Coppola, and labor laws for minors made it impossible to cast him any higher. He had auditioned for the role of Brad Hamilton, been considered seriously, and then someone checked his birth certificate. What happened on that set explains one of Hollywood's stranger name changes. The crew spent the shoot greeting him with variations on Apocalypse Now's most famous line. He later described it as crippling, the specific humiliation of being seen only as an extension of someone else's genius. Shortly after Fast Times, he changed his name, drawing on Marvel's Luke Cage and composer John Cage, and returned to auditions as someone entirely new. Birdie, Raising Arizona, Moonstruck, Leaving Las Vegas won him the Oscar in 1995. A career of astonishing range that eventually collapsed under Castles, a dinosaur skull, and enough IRS debt to require a decade of relentless work to clear. Married 5 times most recently to Rico Shibata since 2021, with daughter August Francesca, born in 2022. In May 2026, he began appearing in Spider Noir on Amazon Prime. The most commanding presence in Ridgemont High's classrooms had accumulated a very different kind of legend, and across a much longer arc. There are teacher characters in teen films, and then there is Mr. Hand. Ray Walston delivered every line with the weary authority of a man who has personally decided to hold his classroom together against civilization's slow decline. The comedy worked entirely because he played it straight, never once winking at the audience. He was 67 on set, and had already lived 3 full careers before Ridgemont High appeared in his diary. Broadway came first. A Tony for Damn Yankees in the 1950s, playing the devil with enough persuasive menace that the shift to lovable alien Uncle Martin in My Favorite Martian genuinely surprised everyone. 3 seasons, a household name, then the long middle period, then Fast Times, then an improbable late surge, 2 Emmy Awards for Picket Fences in the 1990s. Off-screen, Walston's life had a steadiness his characters never permitted. He married Ruth Calvert in 1943 and remained married until his death. 57 years. Diagnosed with lupus in 1994, he battled it for 6 years before dying on New Year's Day 2001 at 86. In 2026, retrospectives of 1980s cinema still return to Mr. Hand with regularity. One of the faces barely visible through the smoke in Spickley's van that day had a quieter entrance into this film, and a considerably louder exit from it. The entirety of Anthony Edwards' contribution to Fast Times at Ridgemont High is 2 words: let's party. He was 20, one of Spickley's hotboxed sidekicks, and sharing the back seat with an unknown actor named Eric Stoltz. And the two became close on set, lived together afterward, and made a pact to help each other's careers. Both kept it. Top Gun in 1986 redefined his fame. Goose, warm and quietly heartbreaking, became one of the decade's defining supporting performances. Then ER, 15 million viewers a week at its peak, and Dr. Mark Green across 8 seasons. A role of such emotional intelligence that he became, for a generation, the definition of decency under pressure. He was the highest paid actor on American television. He married makeup artist Janine Lobel in 1994, had 4 children, and separated in 2015. In 2021, he and actress Mare Winningham, friends for 35 years, quietly eloped. In 2017, he published an essay detailing abuse suffered at the hands of a producer during his early career, placing him among the first men to speak publicly as a survivor before the broader reckoning that followed. He is 63, directing Law and Order episodes in 2026, several featuring Stoltz. The film's smoothest operator was running a very different kind of game, and his real life had almost nothing to do with cool. Mike Damone owns every room he walks into in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and Robert Romanus spent the entire shoot convinced he wasn't cool enough to play him. That disconnect is almost impossible to reconcile with the character. The slick ticket scalper whose 5-point plan for dating became a satirical Bible, and who cowardly abandoned Stacey Hamilton after she became pregnant. Romanus was 25 during filming, soft-spoken and artistic by nature, and felt consistently overshadowed by the louder personalities around him. He is of Lebanese descent and the younger brother of Mean Streets actor Richard Romanus. After Fast Times, he found steady work on the facts of life as Snake, but the larger trajectory he might have hoped for didn't arrive. He pivoted into music, releasing his own albums and teaching guitar, then into hospitality, opening Bob's Espresso Bar in North Hollywood, a genuine local hub that eventually closed. His marriage to Carrie Leiser, creator of The New Adventures of Old Christine, ended in divorce. They have 3 children together. He is 69, a regular on the 80s convention circuit where he often reunites with Brian Backer, and in January 2026, he joined the cast of the horror comedy Lost Media. Yet the girlfriend who set Brad Hamilton's downfall in motion had a career that took a much darker turn than anyone at Ridgemont High would have predicted. Brad Hamilton doesn't see it coming, and neither did audiences. Lisa, his cheerful girlfriend in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, walks away from him with almost no drama, and Amanda Weiss delivered that exit with a matter-of-fact calm that made it sting. She was 21 during filming, and what followed her time at Ridgemont High would make Brad's bad day look relatively mild. 2 years later, she was Tina Gray in A Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger's first on-screen victim, a death sequence so technically demanding it is still studied in film schools. She did her own stunts for the famous ceiling scene, filmed inside a rotating room engineered specifically for the shot. The role gave her a cult status that 4 decades have only deepened. She worked steadily through the following decades in Highlander, the series, CSI, and a string of genre films that kept her close to the horror community. In November 2024, she married actor Stephen Caffrey, a romance warmly celebrated by the fans who have followed her career for 4 decades. She is 65, still a major draw on the convention circuit, and recently starred in the indie thriller The Id. The other stoner bud in Spicoli's van had been quietly building his own legend while everyone else's story was in motion. Eric Stoltz was cast as Marty McFly in Back to the Future, filmed for 5 weeks alongside his Fast Times at Ridgemont High role as one of Spicoli's silent van companions, and was then replaced by Michael J. Fox because his performance was considered too intense and not funny enough. He rarely discussed the humiliation for decades. When he finally opened up in the 2020s, he described how it pushed him toward darker, more demanding material, which explains Mask, which earned him a Golden Globe nomination in 1985, which explains Pulp Fiction. He built an indie reputation on projects that valued genuine acting over conventional charm, developing the kind of underground respect that outlasts box office. His bond with Anthony Edwards, formed during Fast Times, survived both their rises. They still collaborate, with Stoltz directing Edwards in recent Law & Order episodes. He married artist Bernadette Moley in 2005, and they have a daughter, Catalina. Earlier, he had dated Bridget Fonda and his Fast Times co-star Jennifer Jason Leigh. Or in April 2026, a rare public appearance created real surprise at his transformed look, silver-bearded and quietly commanding, almost unrecognizable from the red-headed background figure in Spicoli's van. The cheerleader who had been bouncing through those same hallways with relentless optimism carried a very different kind of story beneath the pom-poms. Cindy, the Spirit Bunny cheerleader in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, is the film's great comic counterweight, perpetually cheering while everyone around her is apathetic. Kelly Maroney played that relentless positivity as a deliberate choice, making Cindy so enthusiastically upbeat that it reads as its own kind of madness. She was 21 during filming, had never been a cheerleader in her life, and was essentially trained for the role from scratch. In Night of the Comet in 1984 and Chopping Mall in 1986 took her somewhere unexpected, establishing her as a fixture in the science fiction and horror landscape that rewards devoted performers with a loyalty mainstream Hollywood rarely offers. She has spoken openly about the late 1990s, a difficult stretch when she felt aged out of the youthful roles that had defined her, before building a convention career that has sustained her for decades and connected her directly with the audiences who kept her work alive. She married magician Daniel Yulin in 2016, and they are regulars at Los Angeles' Magic Castle. She is 65, and in 2026 won the Best Actress Award at the Hollywood Real Independent Film Festival for Apocalypse Death Party. The biology teacher across the hallway had lived through 3 entirely separate careers before Ridgemont High ever appeared on his schedule. Vincent Schiavelli understood Mr. Vargas in Fast Times without needing to research him. Born with Marfan syndrome, he stood 6'6" with elongated fingers and a gaunt, striking face that casting directors spent his entire career describing as haunted. He was 33 when he played the biology teacher who marches students to the morgue and discusses the human heart with the serenity of someone entirely at peace with death. He later joked that he was the only person on set at ease around the real cadaver used in that scene. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest had already come before Fast Times. Amadeus and Man on the Moon followed after. Or a career built largely with Milos Forman gave him a seriousness of purpose that went beyond the man with the sad eyes label that followed him everywhere. He married actress Alice Beasley in 1985, had son Andrea before divorcing in 1988, and later married harpist Carol Sue McCullion. In his final years, he relocated to his ancestral Sicilian village, became a respected food writer, and published the cookbook Many Beautiful Things. He died on December 26, 2005, at 57. His cookbook remains a quiet cult favorite among food writers in 2026. The young woman who appears briefly as one of Stacy's friends had a famous brother and a second career that had nothing to do with acting. Pamela Springsteen appears in Fast Times at Ridgemont High as Dina Phillips, one of the cheerleaders in Stacy's social circle, a role small enough that she is often remembered simply as Bruce Springsteen's sister. That is an unfair reduction, though an understandable one. She was 20 during filming, quietly observant on set, and even then cast members noticed she had the eye of someone watching everything more carefully than the part she was playing required. After Fast Times, she made a sharp detour into the slasher genre, playing killer Angela Baker in Sleepaway Camp 2 and 3, roles that gave her a cult following in a very different corner of pop culture from the one she had grown up beside. Then, in the early 1990s, she stopped acting entirely. What replaced it was not a retreat but a transition. Photography, pursued with a seriousness that eventually produced exhibition-level work and album covers for Robert Plant, Keith Urban, and her brother Bruce. She married director Bobby Roth in 2002. They have a daughter, Ruby. At 64, she remains active in music photography, and in May 2026 was credited with backstage and promotional images for Bruce Springsteen's 2026 World Tour. The film's emotional anchor, the character who carried everything that wasn't a laugh line, had been working just as deliberately toward her own kind of recognition. Before filming began, Jennifer Jason Leigh took a job at Perry's Pizza in the Sherman Oaks Galleria and worked there undercover for 3 weeks to prepare for Stacy Hamilton in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. She served real customers and absorbed the specific boredom of mall work that Stacy carries through the film. That preparation tells you something about who Leigh is, an actress who does not approximate experience but enters it. Stacy is the film's real subject. While Spicoli got the laughs, Stacy's journey through lost innocence, a pregnancy, and an abortion, handled with quiet maturity, provided the film's actual weight. Leigh was 20, the daughter of actor Vic Morrow. A year after Fast Times, her father died in a catastrophic accident on the set of Twilight Zone, the movie. That loss, arriving when she was barely beginning, sits beneath much of what came after. She married director Noah Baumbach in 2005, had son Romer Emanuel, and divorced in 2013, a split cited as partial inspiration for Marriage Story. She avoided Brat Pack fame in favor of an indie career that produced an Oscar nomination for The Hateful Eight. In March 2026, she appeared in the Netflix series Something Very Bad Is Going to Happen, and later in Crime 101 alongside Chris Hemsworth. The sweet, unnervous boy who could never quite work up the courage to ask Stacy out deserves the final word. The year before Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Brian Backer won a Tony Award for The Floating Light Bulb, Woody Allen's Broadway play. While his co-stars, Penn, Cage, Whitaker, Edwards, were unknown quantities still finding their footing, Backer arrived as the most decorated theater actor among them. Then he played Rat Ratner, and the film worked exactly as intended. Mark Rat Ratner, the sweaty, sweet, terminally nervous kid who cannot bring himself to ask Stacy Hamilton out, is the audience surrogate for every self-conscious teenager who ever talked themselves out of something they wanted. Backer played him with such authenticity that casting directors couldn't see past it.